So that's been the biggest shift for me, because what I noticed in my medical practice was if people did not love themselves, if they did not believe that they were worthy of health and vitality, it doesn't matter what I do for you. It doesn't matter what drug, what treatment, what psychotherapy, like you and I, we did the talk therapy, we did the antidepressants. If you don't get to that fundamental root, then everything you throw at them will not work or will not stick.
It's really interesting stuff. I've got so many things to ask you, but I suppose the obvious thing is you talk of this, again, we go back to the schism between the arts and the creativity, and you're very much into, from looking at what you put out there, the creative purpose, right? Finding your creative purpose. And, many times I've heard you talk about this point in time when you were in France, you were in Cannes, where you are now, and you went on the stage and you were very depressed, I think, at the time, and you happened to have a great night singing and expressing yourself, and I've heard you sing, and it's fucking amazing, actually.
Thank you.
And then and I understand this sentiment that happens next as well. And then after having that time, you go back and you've got to go home, and it just all comes crowding in because you've had such a, in polarity to that great time you had, you kind of feel like you can't cope anymore with your life, and you also, and you were doing incredible stuff. I mean, you're an Oprah Winfrey, you were, just a very high achieving life, and but you were saying you're finding it hard to get up in the morning and put a face on,
Yeah, I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's very true. I had been at the pinnacle of success, and it was meaningless. It was empty, and I felt miserable inside. But it's exactly what you described, that polarity between being on stage. And it wasn't just that I had a great time. Adam, I felt, for the first time in years, I felt like my true self. And I felt accepted and seen as my true self. Because here I am, I'm singing to a bunch of party goers that I don't know. I know I'll never see them again. But there was this sense of cohesion, this sense of bliss and acceptance. And they didn't know me. They didn't read my bio. They had no clue who I was. And yet I felt more seen and accepted than I'd felt in years. And more seen and accepted than I felt in America, even though I was on TV every single day. And so it was that polarity, getting back to my hotel room going like, what the? Like, I got to go back into this prison? And that's when I lost it. That's when I really threw my hands up and said, God, I can't do this. You're going to have to take my life.
Yeah. An incredible moment, because if you really, I think, and because I've been there as well, and I think if you really say that and you really, come into that point of utter not knowing and kind of just, despair, but not in despair necessarily in a kind of active suicidal way, but just like, I don't know anymore, and from there, there's that creativity that everything seemed to change for me from that point.
Yeah, it did. Because as I flung myself on the bed, crying out to God to take my life, I did not have any plans of suicide, but I did want my life to end. I had already made an agreement with life that I wouldn't take my own life. So I asked God to do it, like, take it. I don't know what I'm doing with it. And when I left my body and went into this bright white light and then over to the other side, I had this near-death experience that so many people describe, of seeing my life reviewed in just a millisecond, and then coming to understand that we are all little droplets of God consciousness, little droplets of light, or the soul essence. And when we incarnate, it's up to us to determine who we will be. And when I got that awareness, it was like, it seemed so obvious, like, oh, duh, I can choose my life. But it wasn't very clear to me back then. I had had my life steered by my parents, and in the school system, and in the medical society, and in the media. But in that moment of surrender, when my ego was completely out of the way, my soul was like, okay, if I can go back and choose, I'll go and choose differently. And that's when I saw a whole vision for my future. I saw in just
really
full Technicolor, I saw a vision of me walking hand in hand with a child, which was weird because I was almost 35 and single.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, I have a child in this vision. And in this future vision, I was singing professionally and healing with my hands. Now, the last part was a little weird because I'm like, wait, God, you're going to make me a woo-woo doctor now? I had been so prided on my scientific background. But it looked so amazing that I was like, you know what? I'll take that life. And I instantly came back into my body. And that dark cloud of depression was gone. And that's when I made this commitment to live with my truth. And a couple of months later, I had met and fallen in love with the father of my child.
Right.
And a couple of years after that, my daughter and I moved here to the south of France, where we've now lived for 11 years.
Oh, that long? I didn't know you'd been around. Right, okay. Right.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And just from that moment, everything shifted.
Absolutely. Everything from that moment. And of course, when I became pregnant that year, it was even more solidified. It was like, I am not going to live an inauthentic life. Because I know that children model what we do, not what we say, it's what we do. And I was committed to live an authentic life. So I shifted the way I did my work. I ended up closing the wellness center so that I could be a full-time mom for the first few years and really just be present with my daughter. And from that day forward, it's changed everything. It's changed the way I work, the types of clients I take on, and obviously the kind of work that I do.
How do people find the courage, first of all, to even consider looking for their purpose, right? I mean, it seems like many people are probably going to reflect, well, that's a nice idea, right? That's a privilege that, I don't have the possibility of even debating with myself, right? To find my true purpose. It's like, I've got responsibilities, I've got bills to pay. I don't know what the hell I'm to do, like I'm just working this job because I got to, like, where do we go from here? And how? And do you think everyone has a purpose? And how do we start to intuit that purpose? And how do we begin to have the courage to do so?
I believe all of us, all beings come here with a purpose. And not all of them have to be big and lofty, running your own company or whatever, but we each have a purpose, whether that is really to be fully present as a parent. For a few years of my life, that was my sole purpose. Right. Over time, my purpose has evolved to where I am now, leading other luminaries and coaches into the media and such. I think there are two pieces of your question that I want to get to. Number one, in my case, it wasn't courageous. A lot of people say that, like, oh my God, you were so courageous. You left the practice of medicine, you left media, you left America, took your child. For me, it wasn't bravery. That was an absolute must to live in alignment with my soul. And the reason I say that is because I think for people who feel like maybe finding your purpose is a luxury, there will likely come a point in your life where something shifts. Either you see somebody else die, or you see somebody else rocking their purpose, and you see them like living, you're like, wait a minute. We each come to a moment where it's like the hero's journey. We get this calling to level up. And for me, that's what it was. I had no other choice. I already didn't want to live my life. For me, I had no other choice.
Yes.
So,
I mean, I said that I suppose inauthentically in a way, because that's exactly how I came to experience what I'm doing. There comes to a point where there's no other option, so it's not courage, and people, because people have said the same thing. It's not. It's just that is, unfortunately, that is not usually framed in the positive. That you see, like everything's going fine, you see something else, like, oh, that's even better. Like, it's usually like, well, really, there's no other way out. Is this or just darkness, And I was going to ask before, actually, from the point of the catharsis and the new beginning on the bed, was that the first point when the depression finally shifted? Because you'd kind of carried that along with you, as I understand, since the med school, and your professional career in different incarnations of that, and it wasn't shifting.
Exactly. Yeah, the depression for me actually started in childhood. It was never fully labeled as such, but now that I know what I know, I can see that there was this deep sadness from my childhood all the way into my early 30s. But after that moment in 2005, the depression never returned like that. I did have some baby blues or postnatal depression that impacted me, but nothing like what I went through before, where I didn't want my life. And I can say that, that's now 16 years that I've been able to live not on antidepressants, not waking up dreading my life. Like, that's really significant for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I said it's a result. And what about, and the part of my question, it was qualified, I think, in 3 parts, wasn't it? So the other part of the question is, how do we come into start intuiting or, even considering what our purpose might be other than what's right in front of us that we have to do? Because day in, day out, it's like you've got a certain task you have to do. It doesn't feel like there's much space, even for me, like coming into new territory. Oftentimes it's like you've got these things in your day and you don't really have that space to dream, as it were, or even trust those little intuitions necessarily.
Yeah. There are 4 things on my list. The first one would be breath work.
Right.
Second would be meditation. Third would be yoga. And the fourth is journaling. Right. Combine all of them and you've got like a super-powered way to learn how to really go within, to start to hear your authentic self, the voice of your soul. Like breath work is just a beautiful mindful practice that is any beginner can do. And of course, this as an expert, like just focusing on the breath can bring us into this present moment and start to quiet down the chatter in our monkey mind enough that we might start to hear or intuit or feel something. And again, you may not know how to define it and you may judge it as crazy. I will say for me, when I started to feel like I wanted to get back on TV and back on stage, I was already living here in the south of France. And one morning I was sitting in meditation and I just felt this kind of rumbling, this kind of, all I could say is it was a feeling. It was a calling to get back on TV. And at first I went into judgment. I was like, oh, you just missed being a big star on TV, huh? And as I went back and I sat with my breath on my meditation cushion, it was like, no, this is not my ego speaking. This is my heart, because I love performing and teaching and expressing. And that was when I realized, okay, this is a part of me. This is divine. I didn't feel like it was coming from my ego. So I find that, doing these things and certainly doing, you could also do just connecting in nature, gardening, being out with, the elements. But being on a yoga mat is a beautiful way to really hear that inner voice, that inner calling. And, we've helped so many amazing yogis like share their message with the world. And I'm always inspired when I hear about the transformation that happens. It's not just while being on the mat, obviously. Being on the yoga mat is where you do the training, but it's the revelations that you hear about what that meant in the rest of their lives. And so those are the 4 things that I would recommend if you really wanted to start to hear and trust your own gut and heart, your soul, to find that intuitive nudge toward your purpose. Those are the 4 things I'd recommend.
It's funny because I picked up a pen after years. I was an academic, kind of pathway before I found yoga. And as I said, it kind of wasn't going well at university. And so I kind of stopped writing and reading. And then more latterly, I picked up the pen and I started writing in. You could call it journaling, or and yeah, it's been incredible actually. Equally as powerful as the yoga. I think really. So I totally recommend to anyone, do a bit of creative writing, whatever it is, and it just starts to kind of bring stuff out, right?
Yeah. That has inspired me to write books. I think we've written and published 13 books since I moved to France. So it just flows.
What about the you talk about neurofeedback? Do you want to talk about that? As I understand it, it's like putting electrodes onto your head. Is that right?
Yeah.
Are you still doing that? It kind of sounded interesting. Right, okay.
I am. The nerd in me cannot go away. That part is here to stay. A few years ago, I read this book by C. Maxwell Cade, who is a British physicist and Zen master. And I was reading about how he was hooking up EEG sensors on the heads of yogis, mediums, other healers. And he and a partner had developed the very first kind of consumer EEG. And they could see the brainwave patterns on this electroencephalogram. And they started to recognize that certain types of meditation and breath work and visualization could get you into brainwave patterns that he and his protege ended up calling the awakened mind. So Anna Weiss. So Anna Weiss learned in England and then moved to America. And a few years ago, when I was reading his book, I met someone who trained with Anna Weiss. And I was like, oh my God, I want to get one of these. So I went to Pennsylvania and I sat down with Judith Pennington, no relation, same last name, really amazing, from the Institute for the Awakened Mind. And I got trained on doing this EEG neurofeedback. So as you said, you put these sensors on your head, and then as you're listening either to a guided meditation or you could just do it on your own, the computer program will give you little feedback, little audio cues that let you know if you're getting into the brainwave pattern that you desire. And I found it fascinating because I've been meditating since university, but with the biofeedback training, I noticed I could get faster and more reliably into these deeper states of meditation. And recently I've been trying out the consumer version of the Mind Mirror. It's called Muse. And it's a little bit of a different system, not as techy as the Mind Mirror, but it's really elegant because we can train ourselves. And even without using EEG, after a while, you just train your body and your brain to get back into that regulated nervous system state.